I wish I would have kept that. I don't even know where that is now. So we are broadcasting. It looks like folks are starting to trickle in. And once I hear the terrifying recording in progress, we'll get started. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are so excited to celebrate some of our neighbors and showcase, and for our bi-monthly, which is every other month, not to be confused with twice a month, but our bi-monthly author showcase. We have three amazing and wonderful writers with us tonight. We have Leah Siddeley, Marina Ritchie, and Leanne Ruggiero. I'm your host, Jessica, here at Country Bookshelf. We are on the ancestral unceded land of the Apsalaliki Crow, Kootenai, Bitterroot Salish, Shoshone Bannock, Achedi Shokoan, Blackfeet, Kalispel Ponderay, Northern Cheyenne, I just lost my list, Assiniboine, Ani Gravant, and Dakota peoples, among many others. We encourage those of you joining us from outside Montana to learn more about the land that you occupy and the stories of its peoples. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter and follow us on Eventbrite, social media, all of those good things to find out who will be appearing at our next virtual author showcase. We've also got some great other virtual events coming up, and you can find out more information on those on our website. But before we begin our show tonight, I just want to make sure that you know a few things about our virtual space. If you didn't add a copy of our authors' books to your registration, there's still time. You can find the link to that in the show notes, in the chat there. And you can add all of them at one time and check out if you didn't add that during your registration. The link will reappear periodically as we go through the evening. We are live streaming tonight. So as we were discussing, if your internet connection drops out due to a storm, look for the recording on our YouTube channel for Country Bookshelf. And if you have any questions for our authors, you can leave those at the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen there, and we'll get to them as time allows. If you run into any tech issues along the way, usually exiting and re-entering should resolve those issues. Our showcases do look a little differently. We'll hear from each author in turn for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions after each individual, and hopefully even more time for questions once we've heard from all three. So don't be shy. We will try to get to everyone as we can. We want to hear all of your questions. You can leave those, as I mentioned, in the Q&A or drop them in the chat. We do want this shared creative space to remain welcoming to everyone who's joined us. So offensive or inappropriate questions or comments will see the user dismissed from our space. Now for the good stuff. I am so excited and delighted to welcome these authors to our screens today. We are going to kick off with Marina Ritchie, a nature writer based in Bend, Oregon. She's worked as a journalist and managed communications for a number of wildlife-oriented public and private organizations. She is the author of the children's book, Bird Feats of Montana and Bug Feats of Montana. That's feat as in accomplishment, not feet as in what you walk on. Her articles and essays have appeared in Birdwatching Magazine, AT Journeys, Post Road Magazine, and many other publications. And she is here tonight to share with us Halcyon Journey. So Marina, take it away.
Oh, thank you, Jessica, for that warm welcome. This is the new book, The Belted Kingfisher, Halcyon Journey in Search of the Belted Kingfisher. And I wanted to thank you, and also to say that this evening I am actually over in Wallowa Lake in Joseph, Oregon, right in the homeland of the Nimipu people. And I acknowledge and thank them and feel honored to be presenting within their homeland as part of, I'm here actually at the Fish Trap Writers Gathering this week. So my book, I live in Oregon, but I lived in Montana for many years. And while I was there on Rattlesnake Creek in Missoula, Montana, I decided that I would immerse myself in this bird, the belted kingfisher. And it wasn't because I necessarily had always loved this bird. I'm a bird lover and I'm a nature writer. But I had never delved deeply into one bird over others. And I really wanted to do that. And I wanted to like be immersed in the field. And I was at this point in my life where it's like, I just need something significant to find out. And I also, had some sort of sense of that turning 50 restlessness. I want to change my life a little bit. Will this help? And one morning I came across this word of the day. And it's actually, I have an introduction to the book. And then in the very first chapter 1, I have beautiful illustrations, by the way. Oops, I can see this way. 16 of them by this fabulous artist, Ram Popish, are all kingfishers. And but this is how I begin. And this is what really turned me on to decide to focus on the belted kingfisher. Leaning over the balcony railing of the second-story bedroom, I listened to the surge of Rattlesnake Creek flooding 2 blocks away. Close by, a yellow warbler sang the morning into buttery sweetness. Robins caroled, magpies squawked, but the ringing staccato of the bird I longed to hear would never mingle with backyard birds. Instead, the belted kingfisher would be pelting downstream on strong wings, always looking for fish. Minutes earlier, I'd read the dictionary word of the day, halcyon. Halcyon, a noun. 1, a kingfisher. 2, a mythical bird identified with the kingfisher that was fabled to nest at sea about the time of the winter solstice and to calm the waves during incubation. 3, calm, quiet, peaceful, undisturbed, happy, as deep halcyon repose. And 4, marked by peace and prosperity as halcyon years. As the dawn chorus flooded every awakening fiber, I repeated 2 words as if turning stones in my freckled hands: halcyon kingfisher, halcyon kingfisher. So, and that's how it began. It was in May of 2008 when I first made this thing, and I did not know, as I say a little bit farther, little did I know that this quest would extend from 1 to multiple perplexing seasons, lead to publishing a new scientific finding, and propel me on far-flung journeys sleuthing answers to a mystery. Tracking this loner of a bird would prove far from easy. The kingfisher remains the artful dodger, skilled in vanishing acts. And the book, my book goes, the heart of my book does take place on this creek in Missoula, Montana. But there, I get pretty curious about a real mystery as to why the female is brighter than the male. She's the one that wears the belt, which is very, very unusual. The male doesn't have that. And it took me on some journeys to find out answers, or I wanted to meet kingfisher kin. So I went to the Lower Rio Grande on the border and I met the ringed kingfisher, which is the closest relative. By the way, this kingfisher, the belted kingfisher, this is our only species we have in North America, except where you're right near the border with Mexico. And there you get the green kingfisher and the ring kingfisher, which is the relative. And sometimes a couple other rarities will show up, like the Amazon kingfisher. But in the world, there's 120 species of kingfishers. And indeed, the kingfisher of the myth that entranced me, which is also part of this story, is this beautiful Greek myth of 2 lovers transformed into kingfishers forever destined to nest on the sea. And I love that, maybe because I've always wanted to be a bird at some level. So that bird is called the common kingfisher and lives over in Europe and Asia. And a beautiful little malachite red bird. It's the one that had inspired a lot of poetry, like kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame, Gerard Manley Hopkins, lots of things. But anyway, there's a chapter in here where I go to London and I seek out this kingfisher and find the bird in the most unexpected and perfect setting possible. So there's some journeys outward, kind of like a ripple, like dropping a stone in a pond that's your home, and you follow the ripples outward to understand your own home better, and you come back. And also I have another thread in this book. So there's the thread of this bird learning more, being in the field, immersing in the natural history and all that comes with being kind of a citizen scientist. But there's also my own personal discovery and of who I am. And I was dealing with the loss of my father, and who was a bird lover, and he meant so much to me, and I was seeking some way to connect with him. And there were other things that were going on in my life. So somewhat this idea of transformation is really part of the story too. The myth of transformation, some personal transformation, how the kingfisher bird, I think in a lot of ways, can take us to a new place with a head first plunge and then incredible fishing skills and diving. And I just thought, because you're in Bozeman, and there's another little part, there's just a little scene near the beginning that takes place in Billings. So I thought, well, that's pretty close and it's short. So it gives you a sense of my first real studying of the birds I was actually on a little field trip. I used to work for Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks for a while, and I was over in Billings on assignment. And I wasn't at that point. Sorry, it wasn't for them. Anyway, I was there for a freelance writing job with the Audubon Nature Center. And so while I was out there, I took time to go look for kingfishers. So soon after that word of the day morning, I'd driven 5 hours east to Billings, Montana for a writing assignment at an Audubon Center close by the longest free-flowing river in the lower 48 states, the Yellowstone. My raincoat leaked in the downpour as I stumbled along a trail to the cottonwood-lined river, swollen, chocolate brown, 100 yards wide, and spilling over the banks. I saw her, a female kingfisher perched on a fallen tree moored in the center of the river. Her crested head was the blue of a washed denim, tousled and sodden. White neck feathers formed a gleaming ring above a slate blue band that dipped to a point on her snowy chest. Below that, a rusty red belt clasped a mid-belly and draped down both flanks, partly hidden by closed wings of blue-gray hues. Only the female wears the namesake belt, and that could be meaningful. In contrast, a male shows a single bluish upper band like a prim bandana on his white breast. In the bird world, males are almost always more colorful than females. When there's a difference between the two, the rare gender reversal drew me in like the myth. Could I chase clues to this puzzle that scientists had yet to solve? A male flew in, a pinwheel of whites and thunderous blues. His flurry of notes pattered like rain. She preened her wet feathers. He landed and then lifted off, each downward wing stroke scooping the heavy air. She followed him skyward, wheeling to expose white underwings with the reddish plumage extending into her armpits like the work of a slapdash painter. Circling once, they descended in unison to the same driftwood that parted the currents. He looked upriver, and she swiveled her head to glance downriver. Out in the middle of the turbid Yellowstone, the pair seemed unperturbed by the torrent. Or were they? Perhaps their hearts beat faster in each other's presence, like two people on a park bench in the rain, wildly attracted to each other. So I'll stop there and see if there's questions.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Okay.
And I feel like that last passage is so prescient and kind of timely right now as we recover from massive flooding in the Yellowstone.
Yes.
And I hope that the kingfisher families that were there have found some their heart palpitations have receded
Yeah, I mean, one thing I guess I will add, and this is a really unusual fact about kingfishers that most people don't know, and it's quite a bit of the search of the book is searching for their nest, and they nest in a hole in a bank of the river, a steep bank, and they excavate that hole and they dig a tunnel quite a long ways back. So I am actually concerned that lots and lots of kingfishers lost their nests and their habitat from that flooding. You know, there were ones, I mean, they might try again late in the season or find another spot, but I think it was hard on the kingfishers, those floodings. Yeah.
It's been intense, and trying to understand sort of the broader, as you say, ripples of how that will impact not only the people that live and work and find livelihood there, but the other non-human people that
Yeah.
live and work and find livelihood there.
Yeah.
What was something that really surprised you in your research? Do you think that you does that mythical attachment still feel kind of ephemeral, or now that the book is finished and it's out in the world, does it feel a little bit more concrete?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you. It's so exciting. And I'm sure Leah and Lee feel that way too, to have your book out in the world and get reader reactions and people telling me what resonated or what didn't, or well, mostly they've never said what didn't, but they always resonate with what they love. And it's been truly gratifying that people come back and they get kind of what I was hoping somewhat, and other things that this idea, I think, of the halcyon journey, this look, I mean, we're all, in a way, we're all seeking, and our world can be full of darkness right now. And we are trying to find our way and to find renewal and places that bring us there. And the kingfisher is a bird that's a predator. And so, of course, it's diving for fish and doesn't sound very gentle at all, but yet it brings you where the kingfisher lives, on these rivers and streams and quiet pools, and brings you to these places where you can find not only peace, but a kinship you might not have realized was even possible with a place nearby. And I also think that one things that maybe makes my book stand apart, I was just looking at was listening to an interview with a woman who wrote a book about soundings. It's called Following Gray Whales. And there were some similarities, I think in some ways to mine, except that I think my book might feel perhaps a little more accessible because it's not a wild adventure that takes you all over. It's like saying, you can do this at home. You can find this. You can find this journey of your own out your door. And you can even be a mom raising a kid and having a divorce going on and still do it and still find incredible things. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Well, as folks still think about some of those questions, we might save those in a pocket for a second, and we will hear from Leanne. Leanne Ruggiero earned an MFA from the University of Maryland before moving to Montana, where she teaches literature, writing, and film at Great Falls College. She was a finalist for the 2019 Ohio Writers Association Great Novel Contest, and she is here with her new book, Unfollowers.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So Unfollowers is my debut novel, which is always exciting to say. So I'm going to say it. And it's published by the University of Massachusetts Press. And also it was the winner of the Juniper Prize for Fiction in 2021, which I got that news February of 2021 when we were all still doing virtual events for everything. So, and I might have the COVID. So I'm trying to, hopefully we'll be fine. If I have to pause to hack, I apologize in advance. But I prepared a little sort of a get to know you about my book, but I also wanted to acknowledge that I am on the lands of the Niitzi Tapa peoples, the Apsaluke, the Salish, and the Okichi Owen peoples, which is, of course, important to make note of. And like I said, I'm just going to start giving you some background about my novel. So this novel, Unfollowers, began over a decade ago with a single paragraph. I gave myself a month-long challenge that each day I would write a first paragraph that introduced three of the main elements of story. So character, conflict, and setting, like right off the bat, trying to get some economy into my writing. And out of the 30 paragraphs that I wrote that month, I couldn't stop thinking about one of them. It's a scene where Barb, a pastor's wife, sneaks up to the church roof for a smoke and to ruminate about her affair with a fellow church member. And I kept thinking of Barb's secrets. I kept thinking of mine and of the contradictions that character was living with. And now those contradictions fill 300 pages or almost 300 pages. And that scene appears on page 67. There've been a few changes. So the affair is with a missionary, not a church member, and Barb is no longer alone on the roof. But the scene's presence in the final draft of the novel shows that sometimes our most rewarding projects are those we stumble into. I wrote the scene while coming to terms with my once stalwart Christian faith. Barb's story often echoes mine. We both grew up in an evangelical family. We both attended a private Christian college outside Chicago and struggled to understand how evangelical culture has failed us as individuals and as members of the world at large. That struggle is the foundation of this novel. The story begins among a community of missionaries in rural Ethiopia, all of whom are trying to find their way as God's representatives, as service workers, as friends and family. But missionary work isn't cut and dried, and faith doesn't make someone perfect. So, our best intentions don't always lead where we hope they will, or sometimes they do, and that's part of the problem. Barb is a model daughter until her parents force her to return to the United States for college. There she feels displaced like most missionary kids do, who've grown up in a culture different from their parents. Ruth E. Van Reken calls these children third culture kids. It also encompasses diplomats' children, but anyone that's really grown up in a culture that's divorced from whatever their parents experienced, even in some cases, like isolated upbringings can create that sort of third culture effect. They take much longer to rebel than the average teenager, and therefore take longer to discover their own identity and purpose in life apart from their parents' vision for them. And once that independence is achieved, it can be at great cost to the equilibrium they've established in their lives. And this is certainly the case for Barb in my book, and also many of the other characters in Unfollowers. There's Declan, a pilot who's stationed on the mission, chasing his dreams of starting a family in all the wrong ways. There's Ross, an ex-theater kid turned pastor who rankles at being a symbol for his parishioners' guilt. Makeda is a native Ethiopian who grows up in the shadow of the mission before being separated from it. Marty, Barb's mother, experiences her own displacement as a child when her family moves from the Standing Rock Reservation to Bismarck, North Dakota. Raji is a Christian convert from Mumbai who finds himself interning at a church in Western Pennsylvania. And Tilda is a trans woman and the only character in this novel who knows exactly what they want and actually says what they mean. I discovered these characters slowly and steadily over the last decade, stealing time to write despite, my day job, like we all do, while also coming to terms with my agnosticism and the spiritual trauma I experienced growing up. As I wrote this book, I felt less disconnected from myself and the world around me, and I became more honest with each revision, as most authors tend to do. The final draft of the novel is a version that Millie Whalen, who's the owner of Cassiopeia Books here in Great Falls, said refuses to resolve in cliche, which is like the best compliment I've ever been paid. I mean, it's either that or the fact that the Library of Congress decided to file the book under psychological fiction. And I was like, oh, all those years of therapy and overthinking things just totally paid off. But the novel asks questions that don't have easy answers, questions that I never felt safe asking in public while I grew up in the church, though I often wrestled with them in private. Like, why does the same religious movement that comforted my parents unsettle me so deeply? How have its missionaries become indistinguishable from colonizers? What has made evangelicalism indifferent to women, people of color, and the LGBTQ plus community? Some characters in this book unfollow evangelicalism and some don't, but all of them have to hold up a mirror to themselves and be honest about what they see. And that's something, of course, that literature does very well for all of its readers and authors. There were times when this manuscript felt just like how it started, as an exercise. I didn't know if this was going to be the starter book that you're supposed to like shove in a drawer and never show anyone. I also didn't know that I needed to write this book in order to make sense of my past and myself. This version of the book isn't as angry as the one from about 5 years ago. But I hope it provides a safe space for readers to ask difficult questions without feeling guilty for asking those questions, because each of us deserves the same grace and generosity that we often offer our favorite characters on the page. Thank you.
Absolutely. I love that sentiment. I feel like it's often harder to turn that on ourselves as individuals than it even is to turn that on other people in our lives. So yay, thank you. Let's see here. One of our viewers asks, what was your hardest scene to write and why?
Ooh, that's a hard question, isn't it? Because there's so many scenes. I think without spoilers, I guess it isn't really a spoiler. So I've said that the main character has, a number of secrets. And so, the laws of narrative state that if someone's harboring secrets, then those secrets must come to the surface at some point. So I think that is that scene, that big turning point when essentially the main character is, shown everything that she is and everything that she's done. That was maybe the most difficult to write, only because I just knew it had to be good. I had to be juicy. It had to say all the things everybody had been holding back. So that might, I don't know. I kind of look forward to writing that though, because it was just so dramatic and I love the drama. So, but I felt like that was a pivotal scene. So I felt pressure when I wrote it.
Excellent. Because it did start as an exercise in, character setting and there is a broad setting to the novel. And there are a broad range of characters. I'm curious if there was someone that sort of arrived in the manuscript, but then left the manuscript before it was published. Like, who's hanging out on the cutting room floor that you wish you could, go back and visit?
I don't think so. It's not that this person is out of the novel, but I had perspectives that I cut. So I guess, because I was like, well, I have to submit it to all these contests. You can't have any loose threads hanging out. You have to, if you can come up with an argument for why something shouldn't be there, you shouldn't have it there. But I did have one of Barb's children had a point of view section, 2 point of view sections. And I just sort of said to myself, I guess there's no reason to do this. And so, but I salvaged the scenes in other perspectives because I was like, I'm not losing these scenes. I like them too much. But also actually there's, so I had to do a rewrite to include COVID into the book because it ends April 2022, which was fun because you really didn't. I was like, I'm hoping that's still happening in 2022 when it's published. But so I feel like there's probably a lot that happened during that I can't like quite remember. But yeah, I lost a perspective just because.
Fantastic. Let's see. Did you travel to do research on the locations that you write about?
That is a great question. I did not. And I mean, other than all of the locations that were in America I had been to, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. DC, which is a lot like part of the novel is set in DC. I was living there, and that is one of the largest concentrations of the Ethiopian immigrant population. And so that's sort of through like interactions with coworkers and friends, and starting to learn more about Ethiopian history via those conversations, I realized like, oh, there's no better irony than setting this novel, putting this mission in the country where, like our version of the country, in the place that is like the earliest church population, like that had, the Orthodox Church like predates the Roman Church. But why don't we send missionaries there? So I liked that irony. But yeah, otherwise I did not travel overseas, not to Sweden or to Ethiopia.
Someday,
exactly.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think I might move on to our final author for the evening. Leah Sotoly's investigations, long-form features, profiles, and essays have been published by the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Atavist, Outside, and the Atlantic, among others. She is the host of the podcast 2 Minutes Past 9 on BBC Radio and Bundyville, which was nominated twice for a National Magazine Award. She lives in Oregon. That's not here. But the book takes place very near here. It's When the Moon Turns to Blood. And so, Leah, tell us more.
Thank you so much for having me. I think this is a book called When the Moon Turns to Blood. It is about these two people. The subtitle of the book is Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell, and a story of murder, wild faith, and end times. So the story of the book kind of starts with the story of the type of work that I do. Like Jessica said, I'm a freelance journalist. And strangely, for the past 7 years, my work has mainly been about political and religious extremism in the Western United States. Weird because I started as a music journalist, and so here I am. But I think that where my work, where that actually applies is that I was drawn to writing about music because I always felt like sort of a fringe person myself. So my work slowly over the years became about people on the fringes of society, whether or not they felt that they were there or they felt they had been put there. So in around 2016 was when I started writing a lot about far-right extremism. I live in Oregon, and that's not where I am right now, but I'll talk about that in a second. In Oregon in 2016, we had a 41-day takeover of a federal property in our state by far-right extremists, some of which went on to storm the Capitol on January 6th. So this book started for me in December of 2019. And it started like many things do, which is that my husband sent me a story he had seen. And he had said, this seems like something you might be interested in, and it turns out that it was. The story was that these two people were missing, and this woman, Lori Vallow, her two children were missing. No one had any idea where they were. They were in Rexburg, Idaho, where they lived one day, and then gone the next. And people were saying to the media that they thought that it might have something to do with their fringe LDS, so Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church, with their fringe LDS beliefs, or they characterize it as strange cult-like beliefs. Because of the work that I do, that sort of raised a little bit of a flag for me, because so many of the people that I have written about over the years that have anti-government belief systems are at the fringes of the LDS Church. So I just wondered, I wonder if they believe the same things as the people who took over the wildlife refuge in Oregon. And it turned out my hunch was a little bit right, not completely right, but that is a driving factor, was that the folks in this book have a very, very fringe interpretation of Mormon scripture that they believe makes them the leaders of the 144,000 prophesied in the book of Revelation. So this book is inspired by some of my, I mean, it's characterized as a true crime book, but as a journalist, my friends and I like to say, it's just journalism. So it's about what happened. It's about these people being found, and it's about all of the cultures that came together to contribute to these children being missing and to these people being missing. It's a very complicated story. It gets into the history of the LDS Church, but it also gets into the history of what are called new religious movements, better known to the public as cults, and how many of the most popular cults, popularly known cults in history, share a lot of these belief systems. But it goes further than that. It's about the culture of LDS fiction. It's Chad Daybell is a fiction writer, and became very popular on the survivalist prepper circuit with his stories of the end of the world. And over time, he started to say that they weren't fictional stories, that they were actually prophecies that he was receiving. And so a big question that was driving this book was, what could be the way that these two people's worlds could come together? How did their worlds intersect? How could two people with the same really out there belief systems come into contact with each other? So that's sort of what this is all about. And I'm going to read a little bit from the book. It's just a couple of pages, but at one point, Lori Vallow moves north from Arizona to eastern Idaho, which is where I am right now. And the people in this book have some really unique beliefs about what they think is going to happen when Jesus Christ returns. And they believe that this location, not right here, but maybe where I am, is going to be really integral to that. So in the book, I do something that I like to do with all of my journalism, which is firmly put it in a place and talk about the history of that place and how that contributes to the story itself. So I'll read a little bit here. Lori left little to chance when she moved north. She was in a safe place, right here, where the density of Mormons is higher than in the Salt Lake Valley. An estimated 95% of Rexburg, Idaho is LDS. When Mormon Utahns celebrate Pioneer Day on July 24th, the day Brigham Young laid eyes on the Salt Lake Valley and declared, "This is the place," people in Rexburg consider it a holiday too. Parade floats at the Fremont County Pioneer Days coast through the streets of St. Anthony, Idaho, boasting slogans like freedom, marriage, health. St. Anthony is so small, Shirley Chad, who has been in jail there since he sped away from his house in June 2020, has heard the celebration of the Mormon faith for the past 2 years. That word, freedom, means something to LDS people who keep the suffering of their ancestors close to heart. They remember the history, the Missouri extermination orders, Joseph Smith's execution, the raids at the Utah homes of their great-grandparents who practiced polygamy. The time when Mormons were persecuted for their religion is not ancient history. In the West, under Brigham Young's direction, they would create their own Zion, irrigating this new desert to establish productive, self-sufficient farmlands. In 1855, Brigham Young dispatched a party to the upper Snake River Valley, the ancestral home of the Shoshone-Bannock people in what is now Idaho, to explore it for expansion. The men told him it had frosted every night, but the land suited Brigham Young just fine. That's all right, he told them. When we need that country, it will be all right, and we will settle it. The Mormons began colonizing eastern Idaho in earnest in the 1880s, soon after federal troops clashed with the Shoshone-Bannock in the bloody Bannock War. A railroad was laid between Salt Lake City and Idaho, and in 1883, a town was birthed on the route, named for the man who led the way for the church in the region, Thomas Ricks. Ricks set out to establish a settlement focused on farming, family, and education. They called it Rexburg. And there he founded the Ricks Academy, which became Ricks College, and today is Brigham Young University, Idaho. Around the country, wherever LDS people settled, they carried with them a remembrance of their past pain. And when the federal government wronged people in the Intermountain West, they remembered it always had. In the 1950s in southern Nevada and throughout the Red Rock LDS communities along Utah's southern border, farmers and school children would taste metal in the air. Later, as cancer rates skyrocketed, they learned they had taken the brunt of the fallout from nuclear testing at the Nevada test site. This, again, bolstered the people's mistrust of the government. There was a bruise in Rexburg, too, one that maybe didn't become evident until the 1970s. In 1976, a disaster so sudden and catastrophic hit the small towns around Rexburg, it could have been pulled from the Book of Revelation, and it proved how the federal government fails Mormons, but the church never does. Southern Idaho is a temperamental place for farmers. Despite the rich soil, winters are brutal and unrelenting, summers scorching and unpredictable. One season, the desert landscape might languish under severe drought. The next, it might drown in floods. In the early 1960s, the Bureau of Reclamation, a water-focused department under the wide umbrella of the Department of the Interior, proposed damming the Teton River, a tributary of the wide, winding Snake River. The proposal flew through Congress, supported by Idaho's Republican legislators, eager at the promise of hydroelectric power and new reliability for the area's agrarian economy. Nothing could compete with the promise of a sure future. Environmentalists raised hell at the prospect, questioning the need to dam a wild river and decimate vital fish populations. Geologists, too, worried if the earth was even strong enough to shoulder a dam. The land is entirely composed of basalt, permeable volcanic rock, millions of years old, and the area is seismically active. Still, by 1972, construction of the dam was going ahead, leading one geologist to float his hope that the federal government would at least allow documentation of the inevitable catastrophic failure of the project. Since a flood was sure to happen, whether it would be due to the ground buckling underneath the dam or an earthquake shaking it like a toy, we might consider a series of strategically placed motion picture cameras to document the process, the man proposed. It took 4 years for his prediction to come true. A surveyor was filming on June 5th, 1976, when the inevitable occurred. Small fissures in the earth had opened underneath the dam, allowing water to wend into every possible crack and crevice in the spongy, porous ground. By the time government engineers realized there were small leaks in the structure, their attempts to repair the dam were futile. It was impossible to fix something that was built on aspiration alone. When the Teton Dam failed, it happened in an instant. Massive chunks of concrete crumbling like sand under the force of the water. It looked like an ocean being freed from a cage. The water tumbled in 15-foot high waves for miles, headed straight for Sugar City, Rexburg, St. Anthony, and Salem, Idaho. Announcers screamed on the radio for people to get out, to leave everything behind and flee for higher ground. Surviving residents stood on their rooftops and watched whole houses float by. It was like someone was driving it, one man said of the strange sight of an entire home gliding by on the road. Some cattle swam, but 13,000 others drowned. Some horses fled the rushing water, only to run in a frenzy right back into it, and their deaths. Everything was under 10 feet of water. Property damage was in the billions. 11 people died in the flood. There was no electricity, no power. The residents' world was devastated, and they were isolated. If Rexburg and the surrounding communities were ever going to dig out, the people there knew they would have to do the digging themselves. But the LDS Church immediately sprang into action, turning the campus of Ricks College into a relief center for those displaced by the flood. I don't think anyone went hungry or without a place to stay, one woman named Ann Davenport said in the aftermath. The federal government helped where it could, but not in the organized, well-coordinated way the church did, many said. I do think the church was a strength to us, not only for the help that they gave us, but also for the fact that we've been taught to be self-sufficient, and we've been taught to take care of ourselves and do what we can to help ourselves, Davenport said. The Mormon people had prepared, like they'd been told to do all along by their church leaders, and it helped them recover. Interviewers from the history departments at Utah State University and Ricks College fanned out after the flood, speaking to dozens of civilians like Davenport who'd been affected by the disaster. People spoke about ugly brown waters rushing toward them. They spoke of police shouting through bullhorns at people to flee. They spoke of watching animals caged by fences, drowning with no possibility of escape, a painful, gruesome thing that stuck with nearly everyone. Every one of the interviewers asked if people believed the flood was a man-made disaster, a natural disaster, or some kind of divine punishment sent by God himself. Nearly everyone blamed it on the government, but also said that it was God who had allowed the flood to occur at mid-afternoon on a Saturday, instead of in the middle of the night when everyone was sleeping. God was what brought the people of the valley together. The consensus was that God was not the harbinger of disaster. He was the bringer of good, the one who saved them from the evils of the world. Disaster and tragedy were the work of men. Thank you for letting me read that. I just thought it'd be kind of, I think that stories of true crime sometimes get lost because there's a lot more to them. And I think that that sentiment of like, that, you know, that the church is more reliable than the government themselves is a big, big part of the people in this story. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like that sentiment has been seen in a lot of further afield even than the West, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Mormon Church was also the first organization to send aid to Katrina in New Orleans.
It might be, I'm not sure. Yeah, but that wouldn't surprise me. I mean, relief efforts are a big part of the church. And, you know, there's a preparedness doctrine that's taught to people that, you know, it's a good idea to be prepared. And I often, you know, I'm not LDS, but I often say, yeah, I mean, in the West, we've got a lot of flooding and volcanoes and things that it is a good idea. But the people in this book are extreme preppers and survivalists who take it really, really far, in a way that even leaders of the church say this was way too far.
Sure. We have a question from the audience. Two of them feel like they might be spoilers, so I'm going to ask the last one first. I'm
okay with spoilers. I mean, a lot of people know what a lot of this story is still playing out in some ways, in that the main people will be going to trial in January, but a lot of people know about the deaths around them.
Okay. So Kimberly says, Leah, I heard the Bundyville podcast, which was so timely and fascinating, and then began reading your blog. And I also remember your story of a homeless person in Albany that impacted me. As soon as the book came out, I bought it and listened/read it. Listening to an audiobook still counts as reading, by the way. Totally. Kimberly goes on, it's amazing to me that a dozen people have not been charged in this crime. I assume Alex Cox and Zulema are separated now? ? Is Alex Cox still free? And overarching, the question I was going to roll with, why did you choose to publish before justice has had the process to, you know, before justice was done, quote unquote?
Sure. So I'll do those in the order that I remember. So Alex Cox is actually not alive. He died in December of 2019, right before this became a story that everybody heard. So, and his wife, Zulema, has not been charged. I believe she has been cooperating with law enforcement and kind of telling them a bit about some of these belief systems that Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell had. And there's only 2 people that are involved, that have been charged, and that's Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. There are a lot of other people that were around them that kind of, were involved in their small religious meetings and things like that. So, but none of those people have been charged. And to my understanding, many of those people have been cooperating with law enforcement. Why publish before trial? I think it's a great question. I think that there has been a lot said about this case in kind of a bit of a tabloidy space, and that's fine. Like I have seen a lot of the documentaries or documentary shows about the case, and there's a podcast about Lori called Mommy Doomsday. I think that what I saw in this case was that it was clearly a story that was so related to the work that I do on far-right extremism. And to me, that felt really vital to talk about. It felt really vital to talk about now. I could not have planned for the timing of this book to kind of be as spot on as it is with some of the things we've been seeing with religious extremism and the, lack of separation between church and state. And so that was sort of something that was like, wow, I'm glad that we came out with it now. My plan is to hopefully, if I can get my publisher to go for it, would be to add another chapter to the book about the trial, which will happen in January, which will kind of tie things up. But this entire book is based on police records. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of pages of public records in this book, text messages, body cams and things like that. So there's a lot to be told here. And the other thing that I wasn't really seeing was the narrative story of how exactly this whole thing happened, when it started, how it plays into LDS history, and how it fits into this political moment that we're living in. So that's kind of my long answer. But my hope is I'm the kind of journalist that just kind of can't give up on things. And so to me, my plan is to be there to cover the trial in January.
Wonderful. It speaks, I think, to a lot. It was pinging memories of a local author we have here in Bozeman, Betsy Gaines Quammen, and her American Zion, which does delve into the Bundy occupation of the Malheur refuge and those sorts of things. And just sort of thinking about the broader approach of land management, the West, settlement, colonization, all those sorts of things, in the way that those have been played out. And there is that sensational aspect of like, look at these two things, like, look at this thing. But there is such a broader history and context that has led up to that.
Totally. And I am such a huge fan of Betsy's work. And she's one of many people that I think, was attracted to the Bundy story, but saw that it, despite so much coverage of a thing, I think she was like this. And I was also thinking, I still have questions. And that's kind of where I think the work, particularly on When the Moon Turns to Blood came in, is that, I was seeing so much media about it, but I wasn't seeing like, where do people get these ideas? Did they just come up with them, or are they from somewhere else? And I feel like I definitively answered that they are something that's been around for a really long time.
It's not like the History Channel. It was aliens. No. Wonderful. Well, audience, if you have any other questions for any of our authors, please feel free to leave them in the chat or use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to take a slow moment here to drop our link to purchase all of our authors' books back into the chat. So hopefully you've got a taste for more things to add to your to be read pile, and we'll grab all of these for a wonderful summer of reading. We've still got lots of daylight left. So
can I just add something here?
Please.
I'm so interested in how I have to say, I was like, what's going to be the convergence of our books, And I think they're there. I mean, like, because you, Leanne, your whole novel is looking at evangelicals and where that leads people and questioning and what you do to come together. And Leah is in another facet of that. And then the land part. I mean, I feel like it's partly in my book, maybe it's a stretch, but it's how we treat places. When I was listening to you, Leah, talk about what happened with the river and the dam that shouldn't have been built. There's so much connection, I feel, to how we treated the West and the land and the indigenous peoples and the role of religion in that, and then how government kind of becomes this. What would you say, Leah? What would you call the government's role in all of this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think specifically in the Teton Dam disaster, I feel like it did not quite respect the power of nature. I think is that thinking, that the land can be controlled and used and capitalized on. I think that was part of it. But specifically in the Intermountain West, I think that there's been a lot of times where people have found that they are the brunt of, with the Nevada test site, that all of a sudden people, why does our milk taste like metal? And when they realize that they've been sort of victimized unbeknownst to them by the government, that creates a bitterness that doesn't just go away overnight. It's something that gets passed from generation to generation. And I noticed the same thing too, as both of y'all were talking. I was like, all of our books feel kind of related in a funny way. I don't know if you meant to do that, Jessica.
No, but it's always surprising the way that it happens that way. Like when I'm putting these together, it is a matter of like who is wanting to participate, when books are coming out and going to be available, and all of those sorts of things. But one of the things I love about hosting these, and that we love doing here at Country Bookshelf, is the way that it does bring writers together that you wouldn't necessarily get to interact with in the other parts of your writing life, and bring those commonalities together, because that's one of our sort of closely treasured values, is the unifying power of stories, and the importance of sharing stories. So I'm always happy when it works out, but it's a happy accident. Well, it sounds like everyone has had their questions answered. Oh, haha, there it goes. See, I just had to. Mariah says, Leah, could you talk about how you decided that the story was a book and not just a blog or a podcast?
Yeah, I knew I had been wanting to write a book for a while. Leanne, I laughed when you said, is this the book that gets thrown in the drawer? Like, I fully have like 3 books in the drawer that were things that I started on, and I just didn't. I'm trying to work with this light, and it's just not happening for me. They just didn't stick. They didn't keep my interest. With this one, I think anybody who knows the story of what happened with Lori and Chad, it is wild. Like, it is just alone, the sort of step-by-step narrative was super, super interesting to me. But, the more I dove into specifically Chad Daybell's writing and started to understand the world of LDS fiction and LDS booksellers and the culture and celebrity around some of those authors, I just thought, this is something I've never heard before. So in a way, I felt like maybe there was a chance that I could write a book that I had been wanting to read. So that's kind of what I tried to do, was try to fill in the gaps that I felt like maybe hadn't been reported in a big way before.
Excellent. And here we go. And at what point did you write a book proposal?
Because I never have time, because I'm trying to work and live. Maybe I should just move. Is this like oppressive? Is this just like the light of God coming down, right? I
Good for being in Idaho.
yeah, I did not March 2020 was when I did it, because all of a sudden I lost every piece of work that I had. So I had all these assignments and plans for the year. COVID hit, and then I had nothing. And all of a sudden, no one was responding to my emails, my story pitches. So I just thought, okay, well, I want to write a book. I had been pitching it as a magazine story, and I just wasn't hearing anything back from people. So I wrote a proposal, and then no one actually wanted to buy it. So I just moved on and thought, okay, another book idea in the drawer. But then by June of 2020, I think the whole world was like realizing the gravity of COVID, and that, all of a sudden prepping and survival was like a topic that people were talking about a lot more. So I sent, an email to my agent and said, like, man, boy, this seems relevant. I don't know why nobody wanted to buy our book. And then he said, well, let's take it out again. And that's when I got an offer on it. So.
Wonderful. Thank you. Mariah, enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
Then Kimberly has a question for you, Leanne. They say, thank you for explaining the book and why and third culture, which they had never heard of. They find it very intriguing, and they want to read this Unfollowers book now. So I feel like everyone is able to get excited, I think, about the ways that these books connect to each other, and can go to the link in the chat to purchase those. If you did purchase a book with your registration, those will be available for pickup if that was what you selected after the event today, and then otherwise they'll get in tomorrow's post. So I want to say a huge, gigantic thank you to the three of you for joining us today and sharing your stories with us. And thank you so much to our audience for joining us today. I know it's a beautiful, beautiful Montana day here, and I hope it's a beautiful summer day wherever you are, and that there's still some time to get out and enjoy that. So don't forget to purchase those books. You can visit countrybookshelf.com to find the full list as well. And thank you so much to all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.